Good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday, so you know what that means. It's another episode of the Storytellers. Uh, Tonight, we have a true Renaissance man, a writer, an artist, an educator, a photographer, and he also happens to be a member of Team Testosterone. So let's give a nice welcome to Mr. Andrew Paquette. Hello, Andrew.
Hi there, Graham. Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show. Andrew came up to me. Where was that? Terrificon, right?
Yeah, in Connecticut.
Yeah, in Connecticut, and he showed me his portfolio. He was doing some work with Chuck Dixon, and I was just blown away. I said, I got to get this guy on Two Fisted Manly Tales. So, how did you were working in comics back in the '90s, right?
Yeah,
For a short period?
I kind of in and then I left almost as soon as I started. I had wanted to be a comic artist for a long time when I was a kid, and then Mark Evanier, the writer of Garfield and a bunch of comics for DC in the '60s, would help me out. So I'd send him my sample pages every week or so, and then call him up, and he'd give me a pretty detailed critique. It was really a lot of help, and it really was terrific advice he was giving me. And anyway, in that way, I learned how to tell a story visually. And then I started drawing comics with, golly, it was a couple of small jobs. It was a couple like horror stories for Edge of Night for Hamilton Comics, and no, Dread of Night. And then there was some other comic that died before it got published. I got paid for the art, and that was that. But then I did something for Marvel's Hellraiser, and then Nightbreed, and then Daredevil, and I did some backup inks on Avengers.
What years are we talking about? What years?
I want to say around 1990 through 94, something like that.
Okay.
And then I did a Teen Titans and a Deathstroke for DC. And then I got on Harsh Realm with James Hudnall. So I was the co-creator with James on that series, which became a TV series. But shortly after I finished that off, I hate to say it this way because it's going to sound like I'm ungrateful, but I was a little fed up with getting $80 a page and barely able to pay my bills. So when I had a job offer at Epic Games for a lot more than that, I said, okay, fine, I'm going into the game industry. So I became a 3D artist in video games for a number of years, and then I did special effects for movies, and the whole time I was missing comic books. So later I became an art director, and I was like, okay, good, now I can actually do storyboards again, which is kind of like drawing comics.
Right.
So instead of hiring somebody else, I just do them myself, just for the fun of it. Although sometimes I did hire other people. But yeah, I stopped drawing comics back in '94, but then more recently, with the lockdown and everything, and I thought, well, why not draw some more comic book pages? It'd be kind of fun. Anyway, that's the long answer to your question.
It's interesting. Your story kind of mirrors Dan Lawless, who I had on the show last week. He was there in the early '90s as well, and left for the exact same reason that there was no royalties. His page rate sucked for the amount of work he had to put in, and he ended up going into advertising, doing storyboards. That paid really well, and he still does that. He still pays the bills with that, but now he's really getting jazzed about all the new changes that are going on in publishing and the ability to get the kind of comics you want to do out there. So we're glad you're back. Now you were an educator too. You taught as well.
Yeah, I've done, what, I'm on the iPad, so I could take you down to my little bookshelf, but I've done quite a few things. I mean, let's see, what is this facing? This is facing me. So Let's see, I can just detach this for a second. And can you see my PhD there?
Oh yeah. I can't read it, but
but that's from King's College London, which is about the same level as Columbia University in New York City. So they're pretty high ranked.
Wow.
But I co-founded an academy for computer graphics artists or game developers, better way to put it, in the Netherlands. So I taught there for 12 years, and I got a PhD in London, and at the same time taught myself to do commercial photography, which I also do.
What is the PhD in?
Well, it's kind of embarrassing. It's education, but the
Oh,
reason is the reason for that is that when I co-founded that school in the Netherlands, I said, look, here's the deal. Since I'm the chair of my department, which is the art department, I want to do this my way. Okay. And part of that means we're going to hire people who know how to do this stuff as opposed to people who have educators' degrees. Okay. I'd rather have somebody who is a pro than somebody who's got a diploma. Right. And at the time,
right.
I didn't have. All right. So that's what we did. But after a while, we established very quickly a reputation for excellence, which is an international reputation at this point. Like, for instance, the game Zero Horizon Dawn has a lot of people on that project were trained by me. Same thing goes for the Killzone series. But the thing is that at the cost of training people really, really well to do really well was we had high standards and we expelled a lot of people. So we were getting administrative pushback saying, you really need to pass all the students. We get more money that way. And I was like, yeah, but I don't want to be giving these guys the false feedback that they've actually done well when they haven't. They're not going to learn anything that way, and they're going to get the false impression that they have learned something, which they haven't.
And the
Sitting there
problem with
and
that in art school is that the real world reality hits you when you show your portfolio and you go out. Now, you got great grades in this art school, and now you're out in the real world and nobody's hiring you.
exactly, and I didn't want these guys to spend 4 years of their life twiddling their thumbs, getting nothing accomplished, wasting their money, and then go out there and find out that we screwed them.
Right.
So what I told all the teachers, rule number one, never lie to the students about anything. And that means feedback too. So no matter how much you like the students as people, always be fair and honest with them. And if they haven't quite met the standard, make sure you let them know. So what that meant was I had a lot of administrative pushback. So I figured I needed a way to combat that. And nobody in my department had a degree in education. None of us had any idea what the formal academic language was that needed to be used to talk to the administration staff who were giving us some trouble about this. So when the school told me that they wanted me to get a PhD and they'd sponsor me for one at any school that would have me, I decided to go for education just so that I would be the person at the school who could actually fight for the team. That was why I went for that.
Oh,
It's not because I wanted to be an educator and I thought it would make me a better educator. It was more like a shield to defend our department against the administrative staff. Does that make sense?
yeah. Now,
Yeah.
were you living in England or was it,
I lived in the Netherlands for 12 years and I traveled frequently to England. But although it is a bit of a trek, it's nowhere near as bad as you might think. I mean, it would be harder for me to visit you where you live from where I live, and we live in the same state, than it was to get to London from where I lived in the Netherlands.
really?
Oh yeah, I
Wow.
could get to Paris also. Paris was about a 3 hour trip. Going to your place would be about a 5 hour trip. Going to London was maybe an hour and a half or two, depending on the trains. So it's not that bad. The hardest part was actually just meeting all the connections.
Wow. So you must be somewhere near Albany if you're 5 hours away from me.
I'm just a little bit south of Albany. Albany is about 45 minutes away.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
but the other thing is, while I was out there, I also wrote a bunch of books. So I wrote 3 textbooks on computer graphics. My PhD got published as a book. I wrote a book on precognitive dreams, of all things, and which was just an interesting research subject that I have looked into for a while.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote a couple novels as well. But I just like to keep myself busy. That's all.
Well, and you obviously have the talent to do those things. Who published those books?
Well, the technical books were published by Springer UK, which is one of the world's leading academic publishers.
Okay.
The Dream book was I have, it's a publisher called O Books, and I don't know how to rank them. They publish a lot of books, but I've never heard of them. It's just that was who picked up the book, so I went ahead and did it. And then I published also in scientific journals, but that's mostly dream research. But I also did something on education as well.
Your novels, are those available on Amazon?
No, I haven't published them. The only one that I did publish that was like that it's fiction, is a screenplay that I wrote that Jean-Marc Lefissier's Black Coat Press published, and that's a what do they call those? Paranormal suspense. And there's one I want to talk to you about, by the way. It's a horror story, and I'll tell you one thing about Hollywood that drives me crazy is I used to live right next to the Parapsychology Foundation in New York City, and I used to go there on Wednesdays when they had their library open, and I went through all their books, okay, or as many as I could. And I'll tell you, they had two distinct bodies of literature. One was the scientific literature made by researchers who were studying all these weird subjects, and the others were like the popular stuff. And the popular stuff, you could tell, was all a bunch of garbage for the most part. I mean, it was, none of it made any sense, none of it agreed with each other, etc. But you go into the scientific literature, and all of it did agree with each other, and they did have like this very consistent way of describing things, and you could kind of put like pieces together from different researchers' work, and you could see how they all made sense. So when I look at the paranormal dealt with in film, or what I see is the popular literature version of it. It's the part that doesn't match any of the research at all and resembles it in no way at all. So I thought, I'm going to write a scary story that deals with one of these subjects that is based on the scientific literature instead of basing it on this popular, sort of reporter's view of this stuff, which is always exaggerated and ridiculous and doesn't make any sense. So I wrote this very, very scary screenplay that was so scary that I actually had this awful nightmare about it. And then I stopped writing it for a little while because it was scared the daylights out of me. But because of your interest in horror, I kind of want to show it to you at some point, because it's based on a classic, like, legendary monster that, kind of like you have Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, these kinds of, it's a character like that, except it comes out of legend. And there are actually modern examples of people who claim to have actually seen this. And they're actually quite frightening. So I wrote a story about it. I thought it was very interesting. Anyway.
Kind of like the Chenoo, that's based on Indian legend.
There you go. I didn't know that. I was wondering where that funny name came from. Sorry.
Yeah,
I didn't
it's a Native American. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
in their culture, the Chenoo was a man who scarred his soul, usually because of he was eating other people, cannibalism. It scarred his soul, and then it changed him into an ice creature that sought out the hearts of men to eat, to reclaim the warmth that he could no longer experience.
That sounds pretty disgusting.
Yeah.
But also, I'm getting that book from you eventually, because I ordered would you call it the Ballbuster pack with
the giant-sized two-fisted manly tales that has Alien Alamo, the Chenoo, and
giant-sized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
But I don't write fiction very often. I'm working on a comic that I wrote a while back. It's actually the first comic I ever tried to draw, and I drew the entire comic. I inked the whole thing, and then I forgot about it, and it was just sitting in a drawer. And then a while back, when I was living in Arizona, I sold all my comic art, and I forgot that was in there, and I'd never published it. So I sold an original, story that was unpublished. And I thought, boy, that was stupid. So I'm redrawing the whole thing right now.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah, it's a bit complicated. But I sent you like a splash page from it. The great big double page with the huge sun and the crashing truck.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you also you sent me those black and white pages, the Civil War one.
Yeah, that one is a nightmare. I have to tell you, I'm drawing it, and it's like,
well, hold on a second. I don't care because it looks awesome. That shot of the soldiers in the grass there um,
Yeah.
is amazing. I love the feel of that. I love the detail of the grass, the gray tones versus the black and white. It's really, really, really good.
Well, thanks. Yeah, the thing when I say it's a nightmare, it's because it takes a lot of work. And I'll tell you why it happened. Let's see, where is here it is. Let me just grab something from my shelf. So
Yeah.
I okay, so this is for Chuck Dixon. He's doing a series of stories for the Army called the Medal of Honor. So all it
Right.
is they're finding all these guys who won the Medal of Honor. In this particular case, it's a guy who won two of them, believe it or not, in the same year of all things. This guy named Thomas Custer, and the Army's publishing these as regular comics, right? So I did one for him last year, and they asked me to do another one over the Christmas holiday. I didn't have the time, so I didn't. But I'm doing this one. And I get the script, and it's full of cavalry charges. Okay, I mean it's absolutely loaded with guys on horses charging people and so on. And I remember an email Chuck said he was saying something along the lines of, I had all these scene changes in the last one. So Andrew had to do all this extra research for all these scene changes. So and I
Is
forget
that
how
because
I
the
got.
Army had some beef about depictions of things?
It's just because it covered a guy's entire life and it was only 10 pages. So he had to have a lot of scene changes to represent all that information, right? So what I
Oh,
had
okay.
to do, I had to do a lot of research for every single panel. Whereas
Hmm.
like for a normal, do the research for a page and then all the panels use the same research, right? But in this case, a reference. So in this case, I had to get all new reference for every single panel. And I
Yeah.
happened to mention that. So he said, I made it easier for you this time. So I've kept things a little closer to the same place, so you don't have to get all that much reference. And I'm like thinking, okay, but you replaced it all with cavalry charges, and like dozens of soldiers lying around in the grass dead. So anyway, I hadn't drawn horses for a while, so I bought this guy. Okay, where are we? This is a posable horse, right?
Oh,
So this is
wow.
yeah. So this is just to get used to drawing horse poses, right?
Yeah.
So um, so I was doing that, and whoops, my little man fell off. Hang on, just a sec. So I was drawing all these horse poses, um, and when I finished drawing one of them, I was looking at it and I was thinking, because I was screwing around. I wasn't really thinking this is going to be finished or anything. But I thought, that actually looks pretty good. I think I'll just ink the whole thing that way. Just which is the way I normally draw when I'm just sketching with a pen, right? Like if you were sitting in the living room and I was drawing your portrait, it's what my drawings would look like, right? And I normally don't draw that way for comics, and it's because I don't have live models. And for some reason, this thing sitting on my desk made me think I could actually do this in a reasonable amount of time, and it is not easy. It takes a long time because the thing is, it's like if I've got you or somebody in my living room or Batman and Robin slugging it out right in front of me, it's really easy because everything's there. It's all
Mhm.
right in front of me. I can just draw it. I don't have to like invent it. I don't have to get the reference or anything. But when I'm doing all these guys and they all have to have unique faces and their uniforms have to have idiosyncrasies and so on, like I don't know if you noticed, I'm assuming you might have because you're an artist, but like there's a different face on every one of those guys in that wide panel, and the way they're wearing their uniform is different. So some of them have
Sure.
their cape open, some don't. Some have the straps with their canteen and their ammo belt or whatever it is, and some of them don't have it, or some have it crossed right to left and others left right. So thinking about all that kind of stuff takes time. Whereas if I've got it sitting in front of me, I don't have to think about that stuff. So it goes more slowly. Anyway, yeah, I think it looks good too. It's driving me crazy.
Who were your some of your influences uh, growing up as far as comics goes? What
Well,
books did you read and what artists did you follow?
okay, well, I'm going to give you two sets because the exact answer to your question has something to do with what I think you're trying to get at. Okay, and that's because I changed my tastes a lot after I started talking to Mark Evanier and I learned what storytelling was all about. So when I
Sure.
was a kid, the artists I liked were Bernie Wrightson, who, by the way, I hired once when I was working at Universal Studios. Bernie Wrightson, Neil Adams, Jeff Jones, Barry Smith,
The studio guys.
Yeah, basically Michael
Mhm.
Kaluta. Who else? Frazetta, of course. Carl
Mhm.
Barks, and just barely making his way in there was Gil Kane and John Byrne. Okay, but the thing is, at the time, I was really looking at these as illustrations. I wasn't thinking of them as storytelling.
Uh-huh.
So the thing is, when I was maybe 17 or so, I was in LA at a comic book store called the Golden Apple, and I asked the guy there. I said, "So, do you know any?" No, what it was. He told me that they had professionals would come into their store sometimes. And I said, do you know anyone that I could talk to just so that I could get into the business, And he says, "Oh, well, Mark Evanier, he's a real big deal, and he comes in here sometimes. Here, I'll just give you his phone number," which he did. I couldn't believe it. And or rather, looking at it in retrospect, I can't believe it. At the time, I thought it was normal for him to do that. But anyway, so I went outside and I put a dime in a payphone. This is back when we still had payphones, right? And I
Right.
called him up and said, "He should, sure, come on over." And he was like 2 blocks away. So I just walked over to his house, and he said, "So what kind of art do you like?" And I told him the same list of guys I just told you. And he said, "Well, Kirby and Kurt Swan and Alex Toth and Dan Spiegel are better than those guys, but sure, I've got hundreds of pages of all of them. So come on over, let me show it to you." So he opened up all these drawers and he had like just piles and piles of original art by every artist you could imagine. And he tried to convince me that Kirby was really good, but I had a hard time getting around those funky looking knees that he always draws, right? So anyway, so that was
Yeah,
my first.
Evanier was Kirby's assistant, right?
Yeah, I do. I didn't know it
Oh,
then, but
and assistant editor too.
yeah. But anyway, so that was my first introduction to the idea that maybe my selections were not the greatest selections to have made, although they're all very good artists.
Yeah.
And I still like them. But anyway, so a little later, I actually got into comics for real. Oh, by the way, I should tell you, Mark told me you have no chance. He said you will never get into comics because when he looked at my portfolio, it was like you clearly don't know anything about what uh, comics is about, which is telling stories. So anyway, after a while, I did figure it out, and I learned to appreciate Creed and the other guys. So now, if you ask me who are my greatest influences, it's going to be probably the strongest influences are all from EC Comics. So
Mhm.
Johnny Craig, Harvey Kurtzman, um, Bill Elder, John Severin, those guys,
Right.
probably more than else. This you're probably seeing a little bit of Bernie Wrightson in there just because of the way I drew the grass. But um, anyway, but I
You know
also
what? I
know.
don't. You know what I saw when I first saw your portfolio was I saw Will Elder.
Oh, that's
And
funny. I
and I
liked
still
Bill.
see it because of the style of your stylization of your figures. Um, there's a blockiness to them, and
Yeah,
and 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 I'm not saying this in a pejorative term, a stiffness to them, but
yeah.
it works. It works completely. There's great texture, great black placement. Um, there was another page that you had where you had a looked like a boy, and his legs were spread apart, and you had that nice dynamic spread in the legs too.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. That's page one from this story.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. But this is a gorgeous page. I mean, look at this, guys. Look at the grass there. Isn't that gorgeous?
I don't even want to tell you how long it took me to draw this. You have to show something from Wildflowers, though. It's the one with the.
Well, you know what's great though? I mean, okay, obviously this is a work for hire job. Um, but if you were to tell a story in this kind of style, and do it as a crowdfunding thing, you could take your time to achieve this level of quality, and still, make a good chunk of money on it. You won't be putting more time in it than it's worth. You'll be putting all this extra time in it that the fans will be willing to wait for and get that because that's the new paradigm and this is the kind of stuff we want to see and fans want to see. They want to see really great art again.
Well, that would be fun for me to do. I would enjoy that. I have to tell you, after finishing a piece like this, it's actually quite exciting to be able to look at it. But
Well, here's
anyway,
a
getting.
here's a compliment that
All right.
Andrew's
Oh,
art reminds him of Frank Godwin. Do you
who
know
is
Frank's
that?
work?
No, I don't.
Frank was well, an illustrator and a cartoonist. He did a strip called Rusty Riley.
Uh-huh.
Gorgeous. Yeah, look him
Well, now
up.
I'm looking him up right now.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, well, here we go. Oh, he's an old guy. He's from the 1800s. Oh,
Well, he might
this
have been
one.
born in the 1800s, but he was illustrating stuff back in the 40s and
Yeah.
50s.
Yeah, well, you should show. Oh, yeah, I know who this is. Okay, he's from basically the Maxfield, not the Maxfield Parish, but the NC Wyeth Howard Pyle group. Yeah, you should show some of my paintings too, because I do that as well. But anyway, it's getting back to the my influences. So when I look at the various comic book artists and so on who've been out there doing all this work, I'm thinking of them as storytellers and as illustrators. So you have Carl Barks, in my opinion, is the most perfect fusion of writer, artist, creator that I've ever seen in comics. And
Hmm.
for those of you who don't know who this is, he's the guy who drew Donald Duck, created Uncle Scrooge, and he did this between about 1941 and 1968 or so, something like that. But as far as I'm concerned, his stories are still like the best example of comic book art I've ever seen. Just because the stories are so engaging and the art is so perfectly blended with them. They're just fantastic. Will Eisner, another great storyteller, creator. Same thing goes for Harvey Kurtzman, although I prefer Barks to both of them. But when it comes to just pure storytelling where you're not the writer, where you're illustrating somebody else's stuff, Gil Kane, John Romita Sr., John Romita Jr., Kurt Swan. I'm loving Kurt Swan stuff. I bought a whole bunch of like remaindered DCs from the 60s with, the top part of the cover ripped off. And I'm reading those things and they're great fun. And the funny thing is they're actually hilarious. They're amusing stories. What happens when Superman's robot version of himself gets married to Lois Lane because he forgets he's a robot, and then Lois Lane thinks she's. So
Is
those
that the period where George Klein was inking them?
it may be. I don't know who the inker was on those because they didn't
Okay.
give credits. But anyway, I get a big kick out of those stories. There's this Rita cover you hate apparently. Captain America number 168, something like that. It's
Oh, the
it's with
werewolf cover.
the werewolf cover. Yeah,
Yeah.
I heard you talk about it. You're like, boy,
Yeah.
I can't stand the cover. And so I did my own version of it, right?
Yeah.
And I've shown it to people, and some of them actually say they prefer mine to the Romita, but I prefer the Romita because to me, the Romita has more menace going on. And I remember saying that to you in an email or something, and you were like, no, I still hate that cover. I forget what you said. You do hate that cover, right?
I don't hate it because it is Ramita, but I dislike it because if I remember correctly, there's forced perspective. You have you have the cover bisected in half, and your eyes are drawn to the center instead of to the characters.
Well, to me, I remember as a kid, that cover was just something I couldn't get out of my mind because of you had the fact that you had the Falcon just lurking there in the shadows as this deranged werewolf high up on a perch, and Captain America is walking below him and completely oblivious to the peril he is about to experience at the Falcon's hands. The comic itself, I can't stand. I mean, I read that comic and I thought, oh my gosh, this is one of the worst stories I've ever seen. But the cover, I always got a kick out of.
I think the interior was Alan Weiss.
Yes, you have a good memory for that. And I hate to say something like that because I have to say, anybody who's drawn a comic book, no matter where they fall on the quality scale or the skill scale, it's hard work. No, for everyone, it's tough work, and I think it's amazing that anyone can even do this.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
I'm just downloading some of your paintings right now. So if I'm looking down, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just
Oh, okay.
getting them in.
If I completely answered your question or not. But yeah, when it comes to and Joe Kubert, of course, I like Joe Kubert. I don't like his stories so much, but that's just because the themes he picks, I don't really enjoy that much. But his ability as an artist is, I mean, it's really hard to deny that. He's
How
fantastic.
about his Tarzans? Did you like his Tarzans?
Yeah, yeah. I bought a whole bunch of them just recently, and I even like the artwork on tour, and I like the coloring, and I've got Fest from Sarajevo. it's just the themes, especially as he gets older, that I find less interesting as stories.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So Karl Barks, it's like you can read Karl Barks at any time of your life. So you can be 8 and you can be 80 and you can enjoy it just as much. But now that I understand more about the rest of the world around me and the kind of themes that Kubrick picks, I am less interested in.
No, I
Which is
get that.
Yeah, so as far as stories go, this is one of the things I get a kick out of with your Two-Fisted Manly Tales. I have to tell you, that was, I don't know, that was like being cooped up on an airplane for 5 days straight, and then some guy walks in with a bald head and a pair of glasses, and he says, "How'd you like to work a breath of fresh air?" And he opens the door, and I'm like, "Ah, yes, yes, please! I have been waiting to get off of this plane for so long." And it's like this stuffy atmosphere of this certain type of comic that's been published for, I don't know, the last 20 years or 15 years, something like that, with very few glimpses of the other kinds of possibilities that existed for the medium. It was so refreshing to hear you say that. I mean, as soon as I heard the word manly in the title, I was 100%. Because it's something that is really lacking in comics. I can't stand these like wimpy superheroes that they've got these days, and I also don't like the idea of pretending to not be wimps, because that's kind of insulting as well.
What was the number of that Captain America?
I think it was 168.
168.
I should know. Yeah, I should know. I'm going to look it up also.
It's not 168. Maybe
164.
164.
164. Yeah. Yep, that's the one.
There it is. Okay, perfect. All right, because I'm going to pop that up.
I also copied a CGC just because I get out of it.
There we go.
By the way, I'm not saying this is the greatest comic book cover ever. It's just I do like it. So yeah, okay. So there you go. Do you have my painted version of that as well?
I do.
Okay, good.
Okay, so here's the cover Andrew was talking about, and the reason I dislike it is right in the dead center here. We've got this perfectly vertical line, and we don't have anything sticking out here to give it a sense of depth. So it looks like they're on two different. It almost looks like a bisected cover that they're in two different places, like it's two separate panels. If there was a shadow or something coming across their feet here to indicate that wall was casting something, but more importantly, I think it is that the Falcon's shoulder or his hand or something should be breaking this plane here to make this cover work for me. Because now I see two different images.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay,
now
we're gonna.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say now we'll dissect Andrew's cover.
Okay.
He may regret this. There we go.
There.
Okay. Now, obviously, this can't be a comic book cover because the aspect ratio is wrong, unless it's a wraparound.
It's a wraparound. I did all of these as wraparound. So the center line cuts this in such a way that you don't miss any of the essential elements of the art, and with a half-inch margin on either side of it, or quarter-inch, whatever it translates to when you shrink.
So where would the center line go? Would it bisect the werewolf in the background?
No,
the guy with the red tie, or would he be?
No, I think it's more like his elbow. The elbow of the arm that's on the right, but I'm not totally sure about that. I'd have to open the art up again, which I don't feel like doing right now, because I'd have to then draw the X in the middle to figure it out. But although you kind of make me curious, so I'm a little tempted at the moment to do that. But the reason I did this cover, and the reason I did the other ones, you can show the others too if you want, is
I don't have those keyed up.
Oh, okay.
I have one other. I have the other thing I have keyed up is this here, because it shows some really nice storytelling.
Oh, I should have thought of that. This is called the Storytellers after all. I should have sent you more panel art. I could actually do that right now while we're talking, but this is Wildflowers. So this is my space odyssey that I first wrote back in, I think, 1987, something
Hmm.
like that. Although I rewrote the script from scratch. But basically what it is you have this, this is my way of viewing it. This is after watching too much propaganda about climate change when I was a kid. But the way I pictured it, you have all these people going into the earth to extract resources that they bring on top of the earth, right?
Hmm.
So they go in, they take out gold, they put it on top. They go in and they get rock and they bring it on top to build buildings. They go in and they grab oil and they bring it on top and they turn it into fuel, which turns into gas, which disappears, right? So the way I'm picturing it, you've got the inside of the earth is being brought to the outside constantly, and it's making the earth bigger and more hollow until it essentially breaks up into asteroids. Okay, but it's such a long, drawn-out process that the people of Earth have enough time to encapsulate each of or many of the chunks of Earth in these space-worthy domes or other types of encasements, right?
Okay.
So that they can be safe, right? So this is thousands of years in the future, and this is part of Weehawken, New Jersey, that's been encapsulated like this, and it's floated out into space, right? Except these guys were kind of unlucky. They ran out of the fuel needed to direct their asteroid away from the sun. So they're about to go right into the sun. But at the same time, other asteroids have managed to go where they're supposed to go and create civilization for themselves in the stars, right? Yeah, it's basically islands in outer space, right?
Right. Right.
And so this whole thing concerns the political intrigues of this spacefaring society. And the reason we're starting here in Weehawken is because the children of a former king of, this larger colony that's somewhere else got sent here for safety during a coup. And so he's been killed, and the kids are there. And now there are other people who have taken over the government, and they want to bring those kids back as the rulers, right? But they're like teenagers. So that's going to happen. But the other half of this story is that there are these aliens who want the humans for their labor, and they have decided to make them a deal. And these aliens are 100% truthful. They never lie about anything, but they're at the same time very, very sinister. So they say, what we'll do is we'll let you live on our planet. You can move off your asteroids. You can come here. You can live with us, but you're going to be our slaves for the rest of your generations. And so the young man who's on this planet has to make that choice for everybody. And he decides to do it, and his sister hates him for it and decides to start a rebellion. So that's what the whole thing's about. And it's called Wildflowers because as these people start having military victories over the aliens on their own planet, they complain that they're like wildflowers. There's no way to get rid of them all.
Hmm.
So that's where that nickname comes from. But this is the first page of the first issue. It's going to be 5 or 6 issues by the time it's done.
Okay. And are you working on this on the side?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
this is really nice. This is really cool.
Oh, yeah. I've got. I laid out the whole first issue, and you know what my layouts look like. So they're kind of like they look like Kurtzman actually. Yeah, but I've finished in color. I think it's the first 7 pages now.
Oh.
They actually don't take that long to draw. The thing is, though, that when I first did this, I was doing it on oversized paper because I didn't have my new glasses yet, and it was hurting my eyes to draw. So I had these enormous sheets of paper, which you saw. They're like 18 by 24. And then when I was looking at it, I was like, I think digital inks look better. So I decided to switch over to that. So I started re-inking the first few pages.
So you're penciling it on traditional paper, scanning it, and then doing digital inks?
No, I've got 2 different ways I did this. The first method was I did my layout on the computer, and then I printed that out on here. I've got one right here. So this is the layout for that panel, that firing line there that you showed Chuck's story. Okay, this is what my layouts look like. So I did this digitally, and then I printed it out, and then I bring that downstairs to my studio where my drawing table is, and then I drew those in pencil on the paper, okay? And then I inked them there, and then I photographed them, and then brought them upstairs and colored them on my computer. That's version number 1. Version number 2 is if it's loaded with complicated, technical details like spaceships and straight lines and, very long curves and so on. Those I'll ink in Illustrator, and then I'll print that out on my my drawing paper, because I've got a super nice printer that can do this.
Yeah.
And I leave the figures blank, and then I just draw those in on paper, and I ink them by hand downstairs. And then the third method I tried out was I went ahead and I just did the whole thing digitally. Now my favorite method is to draw it on paper, but the thing I don't like about it is that when I draw it on paper, I have to go through this photo process that has the potential to slightly modify the image in ways that I don't like. And also when I ink digitally, it's simpler, which I like. But on the other hand, I draw on paper, I'm faster. I'm a lot faster on paper. It takes ages. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. If I can pencil like 2 pages a day pretty easily, and I could ink maybe 3 if I'm doing it on paper. But doing it digitally, I'm lucky to get through a finished ink page in a couple days. And the reason, actually, I'm not exactly sure what the reason is, but I'm tempted to say it's because when I'm on the computer, I can zoom in so much and I can see all the defects that I'm thinking, I've got to fix that. I can't let that.
We've talked about that on other streams, about the rabbit hole you can go into. You got a tiny little figure and you blow it up and you put all this time putting all the little accoutrements on him, and then you shrink it down, you can't see any of it.
Well, yeah, it's more than that, because it like you'll have 2 lines that come together, right? And if I pen and ink, I'm not looking at the like tiny little blob of ink at the end of the line, because it looks perfectly okay, right? But when it's on my computer and the lines don't quite meet, or they slightly cross each other, it's like I've got to cut that edge off there, or I've got to make them meet. I've got to have a perfectly square corner there. So that kind of thing can slow me down. Also, drawing perspective is much faster on paper, in my opinion, because I can set my vanishing points up on my table. I've got my, my straight edge or whatever, and I can just, zip all those lines down really fast. But when I'm doing it on a computer, it's just a lot slower to do the exact same thing. Also, I have to put everything on different layers so that the lines don't get mixed up. Whereas I don't have to deal with that when I'm working on my drawing table. And here I am, like hitting with my thumbs on all these different directions, as if you know what I'm talking about. Because I've got 3 studios in my house. So the studio I'm in right now is my digital studio, and then on another floor I've got my photo studio, and then in the bottom part of my house is where I draw.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like this room is the smallest of them, but it's also the most comfortable. So, and it's got all my.
So, what materials do you use? I always like to find that out, because art materials have really degraded over the last 20, 30 years. I mean, everything from Bristol board to ink to pen nibs, they're not as good as they used to be. And for me, one of the hardest things working traditionally with ink is that it's hard to find good ink that you could use both in a brush and a pen, and B, that is nice and black and isn't just kind of like washed out.
Yeah, I'm going to bring you down and I'll show you. So, and the ink was a real hassle. My wife is a really terrific cartoonist, and she wound up getting this good ink for me. I'm going to really quickly flash on my photo studio here, just a second. So I don't know if you can see this, but this is where I do my photography, and I hope you can see that. And I'm going to go down to the basement where my drawing stuff is. Okay, so let's see. So it's going to be dark down here for a minute, but I'll turn on the lights, and then you'll be able to see everything, and we can talk materials. There's one of my paintings. I don't know if you can see it. Let's see. There you go. I did that in New Mexico. I do a lot of plein air paintings. So I do.
You might be outside of your Wi-Fi range. You've frozen up on us. And Dino Palacio wants to know, wants you to show us where you buried the bodies if you've taken their pictures. All right. Dr. Mask. Hello, Dr. Mask. He says field trip.
Yeah, my connection died on me. I'm sorry. It's I guess I was too far away from the modem. Okay,
Yeah.
well, anyway, as far as the inks go, I like these Micron pens a lot.
Uh-huh.
I had a hard time getting used to the idea of using those just because it seemed like cheating somehow to not have a crow quill dipped in ink. I also have Higgins Black Magic, but what I'm using right now is a Liquitex ink. So it's an acrylic. It's kind of an acrylic paint, but it's actually ink. And
Yeah.
black, and it's pretty good. But the microns, I like drawing with those. Gosh, I'm out of breath. This tells you I need more exercise. And you know, it used to be I used a lot of brushes with them, but now I'm preferring to ink with a pen.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, I got used to drawing with a pen when I was living in the Netherlands. So I was let's see, do I have any? Yeah, here's one. So I use these little guys. I ran into a inker. I think his name was Alex Saviuk. He was sitting right next to you in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And this is what he uses. And I was like, I guess it's legit. I had always thought you can't possibly, you know, ink with these things that are impermanent or whatever. But I guess they're archival, so they're not impermanent.
They are. And there's also brush pens.
Yeah, that's
The Japanese make these brush pens that are really good. And I use those a lot as well. But you know, for big black areas, you want to have, you know, there are times you really want to punch it up with a nice thick black line or real juicy edge line or something like that, you know. And like the Higgins, I find it's never black enough, you know. As you spread it around, it starts to thin out. And Lee Weeks put me onto an ink. Hold on a second. Let me tell you what it is.
By the way, you're breaking up a little bit, your audio.
Okay.
I don't know if that's my fault for breaking the connection temporarily when I went to the basement. I saw somebody comment, show us where you bury your bodies. But oh yeah,
Eon Vortex.
Yeah.
And you can order it directly from them. It's a matte black. They also sell art boards too. And so far that ink works really great in a pen and in a brush, and it's nice and black. And then here's some of those Japanese brushes. This is the zebra brush pen.
Yeah.
Can't see that. And then there's another one here. This is the, I think, Sakura. No, Kuretake. It's another one.
Cool.
That,
you know, now that we're talking about this, I'm kind of wanting to switch over to my drawing table downstairs and ink this story for Chuck and pen and ink. You know, when I did the other one for him, I did it both ways. The reason I decided to go digital for this one is because the Army kept on asking for all these changes based on the historical details. So it had nothing to do with drawing. It had nothing to do with composition. It was just this guy's buttons are the wrong kind of buttons for that year. Right. But they wouldn't know until after I'd drawn it. So I had to go and ink the whole thing completely and then send it in. And then they were like, okay, now we see that you have to change this guy's hat. And I remember one panel in particular that I really liked. It was two guys crawling underneath some barbed wire with these backpacks on. And they had me, they were like, okay, this all looks really great. Hand it in. 2 weeks later, it's like, can you change their hats? The wrong kind of hat. And then I changed them to these like black knit caps. And they said, nope, not that kind of black knit cap. It's this other kind of black knit cap. And so then I had to redraw it again. And then after that, they're like, oh, and by the way, can you take the backpacks off? Because they wouldn't be wearing rucksacks. They wouldn't be wearing those if they're going under the wire, which makes sense.
Sure.
But the whole time I was thinking, I wish I had done this digitally.
Yes. I'll tell you what pushed me to digital was when I was working with Chuck on The Expendables Go to Hell.
Yeah.
You want to talk about scene changes and reference. I had one panel that had Barney, which is the Stallone character, and Audie Murphy in the panel. So now I got World War II outfit. I've got Barney with his modern day equipment. And then in the background, coming towards him, is an Assyrian war elephant with archers up on the top shooting arrows at them that's coming down.
Yeah.
And in front of the war elephant is an entire like platoon of various warriors from all different aspects of history. So Aztec warriors, Egyptian warriors, cowboys, all this kind of stuff, all coming towards you. And I was like, oh my God, that panel was a nightmare. I blew it up because I was doing it digitally, and I blew up some of the tiny figures so that I could indicate like a samurai outfit to differentiate him. And then I'd shrink him back down, and I'd do another guy and all this kind of stuff. And that panel, just that one panel took me forever. And I was so glad I decided to pull the trigger and do it digitally, because there was so much reference. That was just one panel. The rest of the page had a ton of that stuff too.
Yeah.
So it's been a godsend.
I really hate to ask you this, but we're on a program called the Storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell that both of us don't want to say this, but I'm going to ask anyway for the benefit of people listening.
All right.
You said it took you a really long time. How long did it take you to draw that one panel?
I'd have to go back and Procreate and see what the timing was on it. I have no idea.
Was it within the same day?
For the one panel?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Okay. That panel that I sent you with all those Civil War guys, that was almost 3 days. Okay. 3 days for one. It's ridiculous. The last time I spent that kind of time on a panel was for a Daredevil annual. And it was Gregory Wright was the writer on that and the colorist. It was this really long, skinny panel. It was divided 3 panels vertically, if you can believe that, top to bottom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was this complicated perspective layout where I had my vanishing points way the heck off the ends of my 7-foot wide table. Mm-hmm. And I was drawing hundreds of buildings. One of these shots where Daredevil's sitting on top of a building, and I drew all the buildings and all the little windows and all the buildings. And I was checking against the real buildings in New York. I wasn't just making it all up like Ramita used to do.
Right.
So, but anyway, so that thing took me 24 hours. And I was thinking, I'm never doing that again. Because this is just ridiculous. I'm not earning money anymore on this.
You're losing money on that kind of stuff. And that's the problem with monthly deadlines on periodicals, is that you have to develop a style that is so fast that it can be profitable for you. And then the catch-22 is it also has to be good enough that fans like it. So guys like Ramita Jr. and Kirby and Buscema were able to distill their storytelling down to bare essentials, and they could just blow through those pages. They're amazing,
One thing about Buscema, I really like his drawings, but I'm not as crazy about his storytelling. And when I was looking at Ramita and I was comparing his storytelling to Bill Kane, although in some ways I prefer Kane as a draftsman to Ramita, I'm talking about Ramita Sr. here. When I was looking at the storytelling, I actually think Ramita is much stronger. He's able to get more emotion into the stories than I think than Kane was able to do. But because so like for instance, if you look at the Morbius stories that Gil Kane illustrated for Spider-Man, and then you look at a few issues later, Ramita was drawing it. Or maybe a few, I forget which way it went, but it was Ramita was before, right, and then Kane was after.
And then Ramita was after Kane again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So maybe that's what's confusing me. But I was thinking Kane now is he had these more dynamic panels and more exciting action going on. But on the other hand, he lacked the more human elements.
Right.
That Ramita was able to get in there. And the one thing that really sticks out to me is something that you may have seen, and it's a comparison of Kane's original layout for, I think it was the end of Spider-Man 121 when Gwen Stacy dies, and then Ramita had his version of it, and what it was is Ramita had Mary Jane go to the door as if she's going to leave, but in the last panel she silently just closes the door and she's still on the inside with Peter Parker. It was a really poignant moment. And Gil
Mhm.
Kane's version of it, I think she just walked out or something, and it just, you lost the dramatic
Mhm.
there, completely. So it's things like that that make me really respect Romita's storytelling a great deal. I mean, I know he draws everything out of like little spheres that are stuck together, and that's what all those people look like. But his storytelling is really great, and that's like when I look at Kirby. It used to be I complained about the way he drew things, his anatomy, but nowadays I look at it and I think, holy cow, this guy was absolutely amazing when it came to doing this kind of action. I've never seen anybody who's as good at that as he is.
Mhm.
On top of which, he was really, really good at getting like a sense of power in every single panel, which is really hard to do. I mean, because
Sure.
you're sitting here as the artist and you've got this story going on inside your mind, and you're turning it and kind of visualizing it at different angles as if you've got this little camera in your brain. And Kirby just did a great job of like getting exactly that right moment. And the funny thing is, I used the example before of drawing from life, and I don't have Batman and Robin in my living room fighting for me to draw them, right? But as a photographer, I've had to do subjects like that, and even with a camera, it's hard to get that action. Okay, so like
Mhm.
when I was in the Netherlands, I used to shoot basketball, not play basketball, but actually take pictures of other people playing basketball for the Dutch version of the the NBA, the National Basketball Association, right? So they used to hire me to shoot their games and take portraits of their players, and you'd be surprised how hard it is to get a shot that has that kind of action. And that's when you really have the people right in front of you, and you've got
Mhm.
a camera that's really good and it's got the right lens and everything. It's still really hard to capture that stuff. So for Kirby to be able to do it so prodigiously and so reliably is
Mhm.
super impressive to me.
Well,
Uh,
that's the thing about guys like Kirby, Kane, Buscema, um, and to a certain point, Romita Senior, is that those guys, and particularly Neil Adams, because Neil Adams would photo reference, but it never looked like a photo; it looked photo-like because he always pushed the drawing beyond the limitations of the photograph, and that's the whole key with comics. Comics is about power. It's not about real life. Even if you're doing something that is a real life situation, um, like say a soap opera style story, you still have to push that drawing, maybe force that perspective a little bit, uh, really punch up the drawing so that it transcends the two dimensions that it's stuck in.
yeah.
That's
Well,
that's the power of comics.
the funny thing about Adams is that I really like his covers as a storyteller. There are other people I like a bit more, but like for instance, one cover that I have in my mind right now by him that I've always thought was fantastic was I forget what it was, maybe Adventure Comics, possibly, could be Superman, I don't know. It's one of these ones with Supergirl in it, and it's a shot of her boots as the glass city of Kandor is smashing to the floor, and
Yep.
Superman is lurching forward saying, "Supergirl, don't." But he had all these like really great cover concepts like that where you
Yeah.
get a lot of story going on in the picture.
Yeah.
And those I always really liked. When it came to his panel art, I think at a certain point he went a little overboard with strange shapes in the panels and stuff, and I thought that got really confusing. So I liked that less. But
Yeah.
you look
I
at
agree. I
yeah,
agree entirely.
you look at Bernie Wrightson, and one of the things about him, I've I've always loved. Personally, I think he's like one of the greatest inkers who's ever worked in the field of comic books, and he's a fantastic illustrator. But I always felt that as far as storytelling power was concerned, there were guys who were quite a bit stronger than he was. But his illustrations were so fantastic, it kind of didn't matter because that
Mhm.
overcame that issue. But when he was doing his horror stories, which is where I thought he was at his best, they tended to be pretty fantastic. But but I felt like he was really limited to that genre. It was part when I saw him doing other ones, like when he did that Hooky one with the gigantic slime creature and Spider-Man.
Mhm.
Uh, that one I felt had less power to it, despite the fact that his illustration abilities are really, really strong. The storytelling, though, to me, is what appeals to me more than anything else as a reader. just because that's what moves the story along. You know, I lived in Europe for a long time, and over there, comic book artists are revered in a way that would like astonish you if you haven't ever experienced it for yourself. They get paid a lot more to do them than they do here. They're treated basically the same way as a fine artist would be treated out here.
Hmm.
They get a lot more time to do their work, their original self for a lot of money and so on. And one thing I spotted a lot was people who were strong illustrators, but less strong as storytellers out there. And I had a feeling that part of the difference might be because the emphasis in Europe anyway is on the illustration side of it, just making very beautiful pictures. So they get a lot of reference. They get people in historical costumes, and they get a lot of photos of these guys. Or they even have models. I used to work with a guy, Robin Kaiser, who's a very good cartoonist, illustrator, and he had a regular drawing group every week, and he hired people to come in costumes, and I loved doing those things. I don't like drawing nude models too much because it's not very interesting. Nude models all look the same, but when you put them in a costume, then all of a sudden it gets really fascinating. And we used to draw these guys, but that's how it's done over there. But I think that because they did it that way, they didn't have as many storytelling iterations as you would have out here, where the emphasis is more on getting it done fast. So you're forcing the artists to think through their compositions maybe a little bit more carefully so they can come to a solution, and they do it over and over and over again, so it becomes easier and faster to do it. So I find that the storytelling in American comics can actually be quite strong in a way that is not found in a lot of European comics. I'm not saying every European comic. Clearly,
Yeah.
there are people over there who are fantastic, like Henk Kuipers, for instance, Dutch artist who's just amazing. But
Well, the French, the Italians, and the Spanish have some incredible, not only artists, illustrators, but storytellers.
yeah, they do.
They're just amazing. The difference between American comics is power.
Yeah,
Their storytelling is great. It's fundamentally drawn well. It's a lot of illustrative backgrounds and all that kind of stuff. But you know, the American comics was really all about power and as I said, pushing that drawing and because we do superheroes here. You know, if you want a Western, you know, you go over there and read Tex or you know some of the other or Blueberry or some of these other great westerns that they did over there. But you know, superheroes, man, you know, nobody
of
does
course.
them like we do.
You know, one thing about that though is when you're an American looking at the imports from Europe, you really don't get a chance to see all of the stuff that they have available out there. Like here, I seriously doubt that there are very many people who have any idea who this guy Henk Kuipers is, who I just mentioned. And I'm
Hmm.
going to spell his name out because I think he's so good he's worth looking up. It's Henk, like Hank, except with an E. And his last name is Kuijpers, Henk Kuipers, because in Dutch, the UIJ combination is pronounced like a Y. But he does a strip called Franca. He does one graphic novel a year, and that pays all of his expenses. They're beautifully illustrated. They're amazing. It's like what he does is he decides where he wants to go on vacation, right? So he figures, I want to go to Barcelona. So then he writes a story about Barcelona. He goes to Barcelona. He spends like a month or two there, and he writes the story about whatever is going on that he sees in Barcelona. He takes all his reference then, and then he comes back to Holland, and then he draws his story over the course of the next year. And the work is just incredible. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Of course, you're looking at like these splash pages. You should see his panel art. His panel art is really amazing. And the funny thing is, you know, he's got these very cartoony looking people, but they're sitting inside of a very credible three-dimensional environment. And the guy is just an astounding draftsman. He's got one story that has a lot of shots in a garage. He loves cars, and it's just loaded with all this amazing detail. He colors these himself, by the way. And these are old pages that you're looking at right now. This is the early version of Franca. When she grows up and becomes this more bosomy character, the drawings get to be a little tighter because they're more recent.
That's a beautiful. That was from 2014.
Yeah, but you know, these things, it's like I doubt there are very many people in America even know who this guy is, and he's
Hmm.
fabulous. He's just a fantastic artist. And the thing is, the reason is because his stuff's never been translated into English. So there are a bunch of people in Europe who are like that, who are, you know, every bit as good as this guy is, and their stuff hasn't ever been translated into English, and so they don't come here. And then there are other guys who come out here who are basically just the most famous examples. So Lieutenant Blueberry by Moebius or Jean Giraud. Those, and who was that other guy? Yves Chaland. There's a few others, Jordi Bernet and so on, and Hergé, of course, with Tantan. But what you're really looking at is maybe 10 or 15 people that to America represents all of Europe. But when you go to Europe, you know, just in Holland, they've got like 100 of these guys, and you haven't heard of even one of them. And then you go to Belgium and you've heard of two. And you go to France, you've heard of three, and Spain, maybe one or two. It's like that, but there's a lot more. So what we see here is just the absolute best that they've ever produced. You don't see, you know, they have other stuff that's good that you haven't seen, but most of the stuff you haven't seen is stuff that you would see falls at a different level of the strata there. And in the same way, when they look at our work, like when I would buy American stuff in Europe, the only things they had were like the very best things that have ever come out of here. So let's just say I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Rob Liefeld once did a drawing of Captain America where his chest, it's like a profile, his chest is like way out to here. It looks like a refrigerator, or like you could just open it and there's another man.
That's taught in schools.
I use that in my classes, actually. But you know, they're not going to have those comics. They just won't. And they're actually a bit snobbish about that too. I mean, if they see something that doesn't meet the European standard for draftsmanship, it's like, we're not going to get that.
They love guys like Kubert over there, you know.
Yeah, well, Kubert is very much in line with the kind of stuff that they like. Actually, I'll tell you one thing. Japanese comics have some really amazing artists there too. There's this one guy whose name I always get mixed up on because it's I forget what to call this kind of a word where you read it forwards and backwards and it's the same. It's something like Yoshikazu Kuzu Yoshi or something like that, but he did Venus Wars. And I remember reading that and thinking, holy cow, this guy is just about the most amazing storyteller I've ever seen. And he has all these crazy looking panel shapes. You know, they're not all squares. And he doesn't have detailed backgrounds except where absolutely necessary. But the quality of the story was really, really, really strong. It's like something I'd never seen before. It was kind of exciting to see how someone could have such a completely different take on how to tell a comic book story and do it so well. But let's see, here's the name. Yoshikazu Yasuhiko. Yeah, so that's it. But I really love that storyline. In fact, you know, back in when I moved to Hollywood to work in on the Space Jam movie, I sold most of my comics. So I had, I don't know, many, many long boxes. And the only ones I kept were my full set of Gru, my full set of Venus Wars, and my Byrne Wonder Womans, which I really liked because I had some of the original art.
Your guilty pleasure?
No, well,
That's your guilty pleasure?
You know, I'm going to say something. You know, John Byrne used to, you know, be inked by Terry Austin and then a bunch of other guys. And I remember at some point either reading him saying that he doesn't like his inks or nobody likes his inks and they think he's a horrible inker or something like that. So he's not allowed to ink his own work. And then at some point he decided, to heck with it. I'm going to ink my own stuff. I've got a good career here and they can't stop me at this point. So I'm going to just learn how to do this. And I think that was right around the time he was on Fantastic Four. He started inking his own stuff. And I remember at the time it was like, it kind of crude and blocky compared to the other guys who inked his stuff. But it didn't look bad to me. It looked perfectly fine. It just was, you know, like thicker, heavier than the other guys. But then he did Next Men, and holy cow, I love Next Men. And I bought some original art from that, which I've unfortunately had to sell, but I had a cover and I don't know, maybe 8 pages from some of the Next Men comics. Those were gorgeous pen and ink drawings, really, really beautiful. And when he did Wonder Woman, he did it in the same style. So I had some of the Wonder Womans also. One, I'll tell you, this is kind of funny, but I forget his agent, but I think he called it DOA Comics or something like that. And that was his agent's company name was DOA.
Okay.
There was one issue cover that I really wanted to get. It was a Wonder Woman issue, and it was because of something really weird that happened. You may remember he did a newsprint or a newspaper mock-up headline saying Prince Diana dead, right? With a picture of Wonder Woman there, Princess Diana of Themyscira, right? That actually came out the week that Princess Diana actually died. So he had drawn it and it had been printed before she died, but it came out like within days of her death.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was just a fascinating artifact to have, right? And I have an interest in that kind of stuff anyway, so I thought let's get that because it seemed like a premonition of some kind. So I called up his guy at DOA and he says, "Oh, you don't want that. It's just a bunch of paste up. It's just like the stat of some old drawing he had of Diana, and all the rest of it is just paste up." Right. And I'm kind of kicking myself now because I wish I'd bought it. I still think that's cool. But yeah, I like his inking now, and I kind of think about his inking sometimes when I'm drawing my own stuff, but I don't draw that way. Oh, funny thing about John Byrne, I met him for the first time a couple of years ago at the New York Comic Con, and I didn't know it was him. I talked to him for an hour, and I had no idea who it was. I was this. I don't know if you know.
That must have killed his ego.
I don't know. Do you know Scott Dunmere?
I know who he is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Scott and I knew each other back in the 80s in New York, and he used to come by my place all the time and sell me art, and then we had dinner together like quite a lot. He used to have dinner at our place like every week or so, and so we were friends. And recently he found out I'd moved back to New York, and so he gave me tickets to the New York Comic Con for me and my wife Kitty. As his guests of IDW, because he's an editor at IDW now. And so we go there and we walk in, and he walks up with this guy and he says, "Oh, Andrew, I just want you to meet John." So I'm like, "Okay, hello, John." And I was there to see Scott. So I was waiting to talk to Scott. So Scott said, "I'm busy right now, so you can just chat with John if you want." And I was like, "Okay." And I'm a talkative guy. So I'm chatting John Byrne up for like an hour with zero comprehension of who this guy might be. And finally, actually, probably after about 45 minutes, I was like, the way he's talking kind of makes me think he's an artist. And he's starting to look a little familiar to me. And so I said, "Can you just confirm for me, are you John Byrne?" And he was like, "Yes, I am." I was like, "Oh, gosh." I had no idea. I was like, the thought hadn't even occurred to me. To me, it was just some guy named John who's a friend of Scott's. And I'll tell you what I really thought. I thought he was one of the guys from IDW who was just there to help set up the booth. Okay. It just like an intern or something, even though he was obviously older than I am.
Right.
But still, that was how I was thinking of him. It didn't occur to me he was like their honored guest. But indeed he was. And I think what clued me in was I started seeing people line up, the way they do to get autographs and so on.
Right.
And that kind of made me wonder, why are they lining up? It's not to see me because nobody knows who I am.
Was he at a table when you were talking to him?
Well, you know how they have these booths at the comic conventions, right? And then
yeah.
So it was like this giant like publisher's booth, and they have it is a table, but it's not like you sitting behind the table with a sign saying commissions, right? It was more like it had this big central like square where they could go in for private meetings, and then they had like a donut.
I've been in the DC ones,
Yeah, so he was just standing there doing that. So then after like another 10 minutes, I said goodbye, and that was the other thing. I said something very inappropriate accidentally because. Somehow or another, the conversation got around to marriage and how wonderful marriage is. And, I've been married to my wife since I met her. I mean, she's the first and only person I've ever dated. And I met her when I was 19. So we've been together for over 35 years now. And I made some comments about how great it is to be able to be with someone for all that time. And I didn't know it was John Byrne. Who's had a divorce, which is apparently a very awful thing for this guy. And so I felt bad about that later. Kitty was kicking. She was like, "Don't you know? Don't you remember? It's like this is all written up about in the comic book press or something." And So I felt bad.
But why would you feel bad? I mean, you're saying what you really believe, and that's his issue.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
You know.
Um, but anyway, yeah, that was kind of fun. I sat next to Walt. You know, Walt Simonson's a heck of a artist. I really like his inks too, and
Oh
I've
yeah.
sat with him twice at conventions. I don't have any idea why this is, but I think they were both in Maine of all places. But he was always really a great guy to talk to. One thing that really shocked me though, in the early years when I just was starting out, I asked him some question about perspective, and he says, "Oh, I just fake it." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he says, "Well, I have this drafting arm, and it's because of him that I bought a drafting arm, by the way. And what I do is I just lock it in position. I'm trying to move my hand so you can see it, and then I turn it, and I use the center of the drafting arm pivot as my vanishing point." He says, "I know it's not accurate because it's shifting every time I turn it, but it's close enough and nobody can tell. So I just do that anyway."
Well, as Joe Kubert said, if it looks right, it is right.
Yeah. And I tell you something funny about Neil Adams. I pinned him down with a similar question. This is when I was starting out. And he said, well, because I said, there's something about your perspective that's different from the way everybody else draws perspective. And I'm trying to put my finger on what is different about it. And he said, that's because I'm using engineering perspective. And I said, what do you mean by that? Or spherical perspective. That's how he described it. And he was like, the world is viewed through a lens that is curved, namely your eyeball, similar to a camera. And spherical perspective or engineering perspective is where you calculate against a curved horizon. And so all your vanishing points are on curves, not straight lines. So architectural perspective, it's all straight lines. But I work with curved perspective. And that made me think of a panel from, I think it's Avengers number 95 or 96, first page, where you've got Captain America firing a dart into the belly of a Skrull, which is hugely inflated, the Super Skrull, right? And it's going there, and it's got all this curve, just like Neil Adams was talking about. It really looks like it's being looked at through a fisheye lens, and all of a sudden I understood that. So I decided to learn how to do it. So I went home and I studied how to draw like that. It was, golly, boy, was that ever painful, but now I understand perspective pretty well. Which, by the way, I just want to say this in a friendly way, by the way, so I'm not complaining. But I did a page once, a sample page based on a script for Chuck, right? Chuck Dixon. And you and Sergio Cariello were complaining about the perspective, right? Now, I had intentionally done it wrong because I wanted to create a sense of vertigo. And you guys were like, looks wrong, it's wrong. But I have to tell you, I was like thinking, oh no, these guys who I really respect, because I like your stuff. You're a very terrific artist, actually, and so is Sergio. And here I am doing something that I think is a clever, like little gimmick to increase the sense of vertigo, and you guys aren't buying it. And I'm like, oh nuts! Here I am. I just fell flat on my face in front of these guys, so I felt kind of embarrassed about that. But
well, you shouldn't feel embarrassed about it. I mean, when was the last time you were doing that kind of stuff? It'd been a long time.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I had done it on purpose. It's just that you are right. If it's too obviously out of kilter, it's wrong.
Yeah, the converse of if it looks right, it is right, is true too. If it is right but it looks wrong, it's wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Although that is exactly the problem I had with these like supernatural thriller movies. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. It was called, oh golly, what was this? What was it? I want to say the name Dora Maar, but I think that's a superhero name. Oh, Audrey Rose, right? Do you remember a movie called Audrey Rose from the 1970s?
The name sounds familiar. I thought it was something Audrey Rose.
Okay, yeah, I want to say The Ballad of, but I don't think that's right either. But in any event, what this story is about is a girl who remembers a previous life, okay, of somebody else who died in a horrible fire, and she constantly has these nightmares about it. So that's what the story is about. And the thing is, that movie is full of so many tropes that have nothing to do with what that story is based on, that it just drives me crazy. So that story looks right to the people who are buying the scripts, but it's wrong based on the source material. Now, the source material is the writer of that movie had a son who actually kept on talking about having lived before in another place, and he could play the piano and do all these things. And he looked into it and found out it corresponded to a real guy in Louisiana. And so he decided to write this story based on the situation with his own son. But the story he wrote not only bore no relationship to it, it mechanically was structurally quite different as well. And those kinds of things drive me crazy. So, although I agree with you, if it looks wrong, even if it is right, it's still wrong. In that case, you're looking at a story that is wrong but looks right. And so you would say it is right. And in my point of view, I want to do that other story so that it matches the source, so that it works out. This is why I have a PhD.
It's not quite an equal comparison, because
no.
telling a story is different than looking at an image.
Yes, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm seeing all these new guys you're adding to the Two-Fisted Manly Tales, and I'm really liking the art. I wrote this. Wait, who said this? Andino Palazzo says, Nolan kicked my face in once and said, "Feel that? That's how it feels to look at your art, kid." You actually kicked somebody in the face?
No. No. I kicked him in the nuts.
Oh. It's funny. When I've seen pictures of you standing by yourself, like out in a field, and you look like you're in shape. You're pretty muscular and so on. So I'm picturing you drawing Batman and thinking, boy, this is really easy. All I need to do for reference is look in the mirror and flex my arm or something. And then I see a picture of you standing next to Chuck Dixon, and he's like, really tall compared to you.
Oh yeah, Chuck's 6'4".
It's amazing how big that guy is. So anyway, so I'm just thinking about this in the context of you kicking somebody in the nuts. Because if I look at you by yourself standing out in the field, it's like, oh, wow, that looks like that would hurt a lot. And then I put you next to Chuck, and it's like, good thing it wasn't Chuck. But anyway, so.
All right, we're closing in on what now? Almost an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap things up here.
Okay.
Andrew, do you have anything going on outside the work that you're doing in Giant Size Two-Fisted Manly Tales that you want to promote, or do you have a YouTube channel or a Facebook page or Instagram or anything like that you want people to be able to check you out at?
Well, first off, I'm not on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, or Twitter either, because of censorship last year, when they were kicking everybody off because apparently they don't really care if they're stock tanks. But at the time I was writing for Law Enforcement Today, and I had to stop writing articles about certain subjects or else get banned on Facebook, and I didn't want to have to deal with that. So I just figured I'll pre-ban myself, although I did get banned on Twitter. So that seemed like a permanent one. So I'm on MeWe now, Rumble, and Gab, although I'm not super active there. If you go to my website, I'd rather do it that way. It's paqart.com. That's Pack Art.
paqart.com.
Yeah. And my photography website is pacphoto.com. So that's paqphoto.com.
Wait. I'm putting these into the chat here. So spell that one again.
paqphoto.com. So it's Pack Art and Pack Photo. But what I'm working on right now is I'm working on that Wildflowers comic that I told you about with the alien slavers, basically. And I'm working on this story for Chuck. And I am writing articles for Red Voice Media. And I also have a book going. And I am still squeezing in photo shoots now and then.
Good. Sounds like you're busy.
Yeah, I'm actually too busy. I went to bed at like 4 o'clock in the morning last night. You know how it is when you're up too late and then you can't get to sleep?
Yes, you can't power down.
Yeah, so I was up for like an extra hour. I finally put my noise canceling headphones on, and that did the trick. But anyway,
some of these streams go till like 2, 3 in the morning, and then you get off the stream and you're like, oh my God, I can't go to sleep,
Yeah. Hey, by the way, congratulations on how this is going for Giant Size Two-Fisted Manly Tales. I really love the fact that this is coming out. And one thing I started to say earlier and I didn't finish is I I love the fact that I'm able to contribute to a project that has so many really talented people on it.
Excellent.
As I keep on seeing this stuff come out, I'm thinking, well, shoot, I'm in really good company here. It feels great to be among them, and I hope they're not, they don't feel too badly that I'm among them.
Not at all. Not at all. This is going to be a great book. It's a great lineup of talent and stories. Uh, so many different genres. But the reoccurring theme is, men doing manly things and kicking ass when needed, protecting, fighting. Um, everything from horror, sci-fi, uh, to high adventure, like your story, True North.
Yeah.
When Bo told me that story, he had me in two sentences. Bush pilot fighting Nazis or fighting commies. Yeah, commies. I was like, go.
Actually, now that you mention it, I am kind of thinking about a project I started a while back and never really got around to finishing. But now that we've got this crowdfunding thing going on, I might just try to do it in the spirit of Two-Fisted Manly Tales. But it's Freedom Comics, and it would be an EC style anthology with stories about the subhead is True Tales of American Valor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is all true stories um, of things that people have done that display tremendous courage or bravery, and they're facing tough odds and they get through it, that kind of thing. But
all Americans.
yeah, yeah. And like one of them, one story, this is based on a real guy. They're all based on real guys, but there's this Romanian who escaped from communist Romania under Ceausescu's regime back in, I think it was the early 80s, something like that, as a teenager. He basically had to walk out. He had to walk past all these guards and stuff in the middle of the night. He got captured once, got tortured. He then tried to get out again. That time he succeeded. He had to walk all the way to Greece from Romania. So this is all on foot, right? And from there, I think it was he had a relative in Greece who gave him some money and passage to the United States. And when he got here, he went to school and he became an aeronautical engineer. He worked for an aircraft company designing airplanes or parts of airplanes, something like that. And then he used the money he earned to help rescue everybody else in his family. So it was 17 people. So he sponsored them, brought them all back out, and they all did really well. They're all, very decent, God-fearing people. They bought all of the houses on this certain street in Arizona. So
Nice.
literally the entire street is all this one family, right? And they've turned it into like their own enclave. But his oldest son, felt like his family owed such a debt to America that he joined the army and he became a tank commander. So in the Iraq War, he was in Iraq as a tank commander. So I wanted to tell that story, how this guy, he escaped Romania, he escaped the communists. It was very difficult. He managed, he did well, he did all the things that we expect of our valued immigrants. And then his son is paying it back by tank commander, which I think is just a really impressive story.
That's a great story. That's a great story. I like the idea too of the book. You should definitely do that.
Well, thanks. I just have to finish the Civil War one first.
Well, every journey starts with single steps.
Yeah. By the way, I'm glad you like that one panel. I like it too. I'm just feeling like a dumbbell for spending so much time. But on the other hand, that's what it takes to make them look like that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but also, that's something that could pay off down the road too. Because if you do decide you're going to do something like project you just mentioned, and you have that to show to your prospective backers, that's what they're going to expect, and you'll be able to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, that's
with that, because you set your deadline.
Yeah.
You say, okay, I got my campaign going. Here's when I'm going to fulfill it. So if you need 12 months to do it, they know that when they're backing you, that it's going to be 12 months before this thing gets done.
Well, the nice thing about that is I don't really need the backing up front. I can finish the whole thing beforehand, and then I can just, I can take a year, and then when I'm done, I can say, now back me. It's all finished. You don't have to worry about me meeting the deadline because I've already done it. That's
right.
But
then you're not really crowdfunding so much, because you're basically selling a book that you've already paid for. The whole point is to fund it while you're working on it, and allowing the backers to be a part of the creative process too.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, okay. I think what I'm saying is I missed a step there, because what I'm looking at Wildflowers as a 6-issue series, and that I'm not going to start the crowdfunding until I'm finished with issue 1. So that's the start of it. So what I'm
Oh,
planning
okay.
is I'm going to do all of issue 1, and then I'm going to start the crowdfunding, and it's going to be for that issue and then one in advance. So then for the next one, etc. And then the final one would be the whole thing put together as a graphic novel.
Right.
So
Gotcha. Okay.
that's how I'm looking at it. But
Mhm.
I do want to get one in the bag so that I know, so that everyone knows they're getting something. I don't want to be one of these people that, where the people on the other end are wondering if I'm actually going to hand something in, because I imagine that
Fulfill. Yeah.
happens now and then. Is that right?
It does happen. It happens. Um, well, it's happening less now than it did. But yeah, it's definitely something. You have to prove yourself to your backers. You have to earn their trust, and they're willing to take a risk in the beginning, and then the next time, once you've fulfilled, and you've done a good project that they enjoy, they'll come back and support the next one. And it's like building. You're building this base for yourself.
Right. Now,
Um,
by the way, I'm going to send you that Freedom Comics cover right now, just for the fun of it, and then I'm going to let you go because I think you need to end this. Is that right?
I can't, if you're going to send it to my email address, I won't be able to get it because I'm signed into Google on a different address for this stream.
Ah, okay.
So
Well,
I won't be able to put it up right now, but you can send it and I'll take a look at it later.
okay. Actually, I also did a funny comic I totally forgot about, that I'll show you as well, um, called Dr. Andy. The funny thing is, I did this before I actually earned a doctorate, and I did it just as a spoof of the old mad scientist genre. It was kind of like inspired by Popeye, actually, more than anything else.
Oh, my
And
favorite comic strip.
yeah, oh, E.C. Seeger is fantastic. And I kind of am ashamed I didn't mention him earlier. But the thing is that after I actually got my doctorate, I thought I'm going to do an issue number 2. So, because I did issue number 1 in 1994, I'm going to do issue 2 in 2022. So I laid out the whole thing and started drawing it, and I'll send that to you. But anyway, I'll let you go.
Okay.
And,
Well, you know what? You're starting to build followers already, Andrew, by coming on the show. And the more of these things you do, the more you get your face out there, and people get to know you and know your work and everything. And when you're ready to start crowdfunding, you'll be in a better place.
yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for
So,
having me on, and good
of
luck
course.
with Manly Tales and the rest of your
Yeah. Yeah.
projects.
Thanks to everybody in the chat for tuning in tonight. Tomorrow night, Thursday, the professionals will be on. Let's see, who had it last week? Was it Andy? Billy? I can't remember if it's going to be on Billy's channel or Dan's channel. One of those two, but you'll see the ads. We'll let you know. But anyway, I'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.